Hello everyone, today we introduce Ottonian Germany. I made a video last time about pre-Ottonian Germany, telling the story of the Eastern Frankish kingdom until the reign of Henry I, Henry the Fowler, the father of Otto I, Otto the Great. Today we essentially start again from that point. Because Henry, as if you remember the video, otherwise you can go check it out in the playlist Medieval Germany, had managed, especially through his military skill and political ability, to make the German duchies, so these big blocks of that made up Germany on theoretically an ethnical base, even though it was mostly already at that time aristocratic groups, essentially as such, and had begun to centralize in very in just for those times capabilities. That was a very low degree of centralization, but it kind of gave reached the especially in Saxony and in Franconia to create a stable dominion that could influence the rest of Germany and to make the kingdom go towards a certain direction at least. Already at this time, the German kingdom was very much influenced by the power of local aristocracy, and these were timid efforts to create a centralization and to make the kingdom work more efficiently. And the success of Henry was such, and his political prestige and influence had been so great that after his death, the German nobility elected king, his son Otto I, who ruled from 936 to 973. And Otto owed really a lot to his father, indeed, and this is interestingly, this happens many times in history. Think about Philip and Alexander, or even in the same German kingdom after the Ottonians and the Salians, how important was Frederick Barbarossa's father, and especially at an administrative level, to give his son the political and military base into which waging a royal policy. And the same was for Otto, who eventually reached the peak of Ottonian the acme of Ottonian power and prestige, not just in Germany but also in Europe. Now we will be seeing it, and Wu, in this sense, however, continued he followed his father's footsteps, if anything, because there were political and military situations that required the same politics. And this was mainly a military one. Germany at that point had several threats. Still, he defeated famously on the Lech River in southern Germany, 955, the Angers, who had this defeat that was really magnified by Ottonian propaganda. But telling the truth, it was the last defeat of a people that not only had been crushed formerly by Henry at Riade, but also by the second, a branch of the Ottonian family that ruled jointly with the local aristocracy, because they had intermarried and now governed from Bavaria, where they fought actually quite steadily against the Hungars, if anything, because Bavaria was on the very frontier with the Hungars, so they had them like at every time at the borders and inside the borders, and they had very worked out a very good. They had managed to weaken the Hungar power. And yet, because of Otto's prestige and power, even the military victories of the Bavarians were downsized, historically speaking, and for this very reason we don't know very much, because sources are not many. At that time, the political propaganda had been monopolized by the Ottonians, so we kind of get we have a hidden part of history in many ways, and that however would be important to remember when thinking about the result of the Ottonians from a military point of view. And the major achievement, however, of Otto was famously the so-called renovatio imperii, that in Latin means the renewal of the empire, the rebirth, even in practice, of the empire, because in 962 he managed to win the imperial crown, which had been telling the truth always there, in the sense that those who could be named kings of Italy and be appointed by the Pope as emperors, like by tradition, had existed. Many nobles of the Italic kingdom had managed that. Even Hag of Provence intervened in Italy and was named as well, but they were mostly local powers. We're talking about the Duchy of Spoleto or the Mark of Verona, and indeed, even if the world situation wasn't so extremely fragmented, like especially in Italy, like in the following centuries, it would have been more evident. Definitely, there hadn't been a kind of an empire like in Carolingian times, but everyone was aware of that. I mean, it was nobody's interest to deny the imperial tradition as it had been formed, because obviously a lot of prestige derived from it, and not just that, but a lot of money, because there would still be public jurisdictions, a lot of revenues coming from them. So the idea of the empire had always been there in many ways. And the Ottonians were the ones who, after the Carolingians, managed essentially to rebuild the empire. So, historically speaking, by pure arbitrary decision, we make usually the 962 as the birth of the Holy Roman Empire, leaving aside the fact that the term Holy Roman Empire is something that appears much later in the sources. Basically, there is no discontinuity at all from the Carolingian Empire to the Holy Roman Empire in practice, because the idea of the imperial crown had always been there, and the empire was essentially the same. But we talk about Holy Roman Empire in historiographical convention for another major aspect of the Ottonian Renovatio Imperii. That was the reunion of the kingdoms of Germany and of Italy, that would practically remain to up to the contemporary era in practice between these two areas of Europe. Theoretically, also France had to be a part of the Holy Roman Empire, and the imperial authority was conceived independently from the de facto political power that could be exercised on this or that kingdom. On the whole, at least Western Christianity. Then we will have the chance to talk also what the Byzantines were thinking about that. They weren't happy at all. But what is relevant is that Germany and Italy were tied from this point onwards for a very long time in their political and military stories. And this was due to the Ottonians. And not much because the Ottonians practically managed to rule over Italy. They couldn't even rule over the whole Germany, and Italy always remained out of real control. I mean, the Italic aristocracies participated to the empire, but essentially they were de facto if anything, very autonomous, but de facto independent. And what the Ottonians did basically was to come back in Italy after, many decades that no Transalpine lord had come to rule there as a king or emperor, and they limited essentially to appoint certain guys that were already ruling in Italy and saying, okay, you have this privilege, I recognize it to you as long as you're faithful to me, and then point. And that's it. That's really how far the Ottonians went, especially under Otto I. Then we will see that with Otto II and Otto III, things were a little bit different, but the practical power of Germans on Italy was actually very light, very superficial at this point. The Acme would be essentially in the 12th century, even though the Swabians failed on the long run to achieve the task. But you might wonder why a German king at that point would have to conquer Italy. Well, we can really say without exaggerations that the only prize of taking the Italian crown that was required to obtain the imperial coronation by the papal hands would be a very good point. But there would be also quite strategical interests and benefits from doing that, because Italy was rich and politically divided. So what's best in this sense? What a better target? And yet, however, the political authorities, the states of those times, could have a very small a very small effect, a very small authority over territorially speaking, and it would be extremely difficult to achieve that goal, even in those conditions. So, but I'd say that today I would like to talk more about Germany than the whole imperial, the whole empire geographically meant, meaning that the major the major events took place in Ottonian Germany for how it was getting shaped, also because Ottonian policy had very important consequences also in the institutional development of the German kingdom, or the Eastern Frankish one as it was still called. And probably one of, if not the first, most important thing, but definitely among the most, was the role that the high clergy of the German Church started to have in royal politics. Now, the German high clergy was at this time made up by very highly educated, energetic, and experienced individuals who were essentially aristocrats, just like the secular princes of Germany. And mainly because they came from those aristocracy, and they had managed progressively during the disgregation of political authority following the end of the Carolingian Empire to create lordships, feudal lordships, like just I can't stress this enough, just exactly like the ones of the lay aristocracy, that however were on average better administered and even wealthier in many cases. So these individuals were extremely skilled in the arts of politics, even of war. In some cases, the German clergy was quite military active. Let me tell you, during this time, and they could offer therefore a very precious help to the construction of a more solid royal administration. What the Ottonians did in this sense was, obviously you can't ask something without giving something in turn. This is pretty much a universal law when you study history, and or general rule better, because law doesn't admit exceptions. This could, but it was a very frequent rule. What the Ottonians did was essentially to entrust the bishops, because normally these were the major figures inside the ecclesiastical administration. It would be archbishops as well, but practically, that was the main class that benefited from this. So to obtain the administration of counties. Now, counties were the average districtuation of every post-Carolingian kingdom. They came, in fact, from the ancient Carolingian counties themselves. So there would be a count placed to rule the area, the district, and with certain rights that were meant as a beneficium from a feudal sense. That meant that basically there would be a decentralized administration. Through these counts we could draw resources from the county and to administrate justice, to defend militarily the communities, and all that stuff. That in turn now was something much more complex, because the fragmentation of political authority had brought to go beyond even the same comital dimension. There would be lordships spreading like on every possible territorial base. So, but theoretically speaking, there were still these counties, and they were part of the public system of administration. And what the Ottonians did was to start giving the bishops the comital rights. So this is normally called these bishops at this point are normally called famously the bishop counts, and people believe that bishop counts is like, someone could believe, let's say better, that the bishop counts are a way to say that it's a sort of critical definition of the lifestyle of these guys, by saying that they were bishops, yeah, but they lived like any other aristocrat. Well, this is true in practice, but it's still important to understand that this is not the main point. The main point is a juridical one. I mean, these weren't really counts. I mean, you don't have to imagine the bishop conceiving himself like a count, but essentially remaining a bishop that, however, benefited from the comital jurisdiction. So basically they were enjoying a beneficium like could be any other one in the feudal system. That was, however, the one attached to the public, to the basic unit of public administration. And this was very important, because the counties were there. They couldn't be denied. They, in spite of the modifications that they had undergone in terms of local habits and new agreements, they were still recognized as a public entity. They would be the basic unit, so basically appointing bishops as counts, or better, as of the government of the counties, would provide a sort of obstacle to the proliferation of private powers, which was the main concern from a central perspective, from from a royal perspective because of the effort of avoiding further decentralization and the growth of um, unwanted private powers. I say private powers because in this sense bishops weren't, as we said, weren't much different from the other laymen, and they would definitely use their comital rights to expand their own lordships as well. But the main difference between the ecclesiastical lordships and the lay ones was that the first weren't hereditary. So this meant that when a bishop died, it didn't immediately follow that the local communities would elect someone else. It could still be appointed by someone, and it would be usually appointed by the royal power, and that would be another bishop, so that he could essentially do again. And this was to do that again, and this was the same practice that had been used by the Carolingians. I mean, they had already used bishops to rule, to manage other to manage part of the public administration for the very same reason. These guys didn't have juridically legally recognized sons. They couldn't inherit. I mean, their sons couldn't. Nobody could inherit their charge because they were bishops. So they didn't. It would be just theoretically the local community of faithful who had to elect these bishops. Then the logics would be completely different because they would still be appointed by other aristocrats. But in practice, nobody could oppose. Or better, somebody could oppose the royal the royal appointment of a bishop in a county. But first of all, this implied to go against the king deliberately, and secondly, this would, however, still be a good occasion maybe to play on a different level from the usual political and military affairs, and to just play through bishops, like what kind of bishop do you want to place there, so which part of aristocracy did you want to appease, because that was really how it is. When you think that the Ottonians placed faithful bishops, it is true, sometimes they appointed relatives, so people that were individuals that were same part of the Ottonian dynasty, but other times they would appoint strangers that, however, maybe belonged to a certain local faction that was allied with the king, and that the election of a bishop from that family could maybe go against the power of another family that was instead opposed to the sovereign. So all this kind of political gaming that would be quite easy to do, and that it just required a control that every bishop that died and would be replaced by another one, the choice would be guided from the top. Obviously, it didn't happen always like it was expected. There would be regions of Germany into which the Ottonians couldn't really say much. In practice, regions maybe that were even ruled by another branch of the Ottonian family, like it happened in Bavaria, as we were saying, that were hostile to the Ottonian dynasty, and eventually with Henry the second eventually made it to become the last Ottonians before the Salian dynasty. But just to give you an impression what the whole thing was really about. So every diocese theoretically had to be entrusted to the clergy and the people of the local religious community, but in practice it would still be an aristocratic business, and it kept being so. Now this triggered also other, as you understand, this procedure is great part of the reason why during the Low Middle Ages the ecclesiastical lordships of Germany rose to such great power, because there was an institutional before there was an institutional precedent, if we can say, that had entrusted a lot of power to the a lot of beneficia to the bishops, and that from a certain point of view couldn't be even contested in some measure. So as we know, the German monarchy suffered a lot of crisis during the Low Middle Ages, and the bishops would simply go on and in this sense they played cleverly, because normally the clergy was pro-imperial. They played in favor of the of kings and emperors, because they recognized the through that privileged channel they could obtain a lot also on a big, on a large scale, and therefore they would generally be the only, at times the only followers of kings and emperors, even if they were clergy, even during the struggle for investitures, and this is very important. And the same thing would happen not just for the dioceses, but also for the abbeys. And we must think that, you might think that that bishops in this sense would kind of grow even more spoiled and self-confident, so that they would be increasingly corrupted and such. But telling the truth, this is not really so, because these bishops were really figures of the highest order from a cultural and a political point of view, and they seemed they had a kind of education and morality that actually were greater than in previous times. That, I mean, this framing their figures into the royals, into the institutions of the kingdom, actually also brought to a sort of competition of selection that produced very remarkable results in terms of individual quality and aptness to the office. So in this sense, they would also be increasingly they would grow increasingly aware of their moral prestige. They would, in this sense, try also to exclude increasingly lay aristocracy from the comital offices and in general for the rest of politics. They wouldn't manage to do that, because obviously lay aristocracies were still in charge, but they began to even make politics from an ideological and moral point of view. For instance, they highly criticized the customs and the morals of the lay aristocracy that was extremely avid and warlike and corrupted, etc. So obviously they sometimes hypocritically they would claim this because they weren't that different, as we have seen. But they also made civilization in the sense that they produced works that had to justify the imperial and royal authority, that obviously praising the Ottonians that had entrusted them those powers, because they perfectly knew that, and also to conceive politics and in a more comprehensive fashion, in a more from a royal perspective, from the perspective of a state, not just of scattered families of nobles just thinking about increasing their own domains and clashing with each other from day to night, as they practically did. So these cultural aspects do not have to be underestimated as well. And in parallel to this, there would be obviously it would be obviously played by the Ottonians through the high clergy, a great influence on the church, up to the point of claiming a moral reform, and at least an intent, a purpose of moral reform of the Western Church. And this had been an objective that also the Carolingians had tried to reach, and about which they were quite concerned, because they truly believed in practice that when things went wrong, when there were great political crises and all, there would be substantially the belief in the Christian world that things had gone wrong, and because of a bad behavior that obviously was contrary to the Christian principles. So, for instance, the idea of the collapse of the Carolingian Empire was surely interpreted as, all these aristocracies were too greedy. The same Carolingians began to kill each other as Cain and Abel, and because that's what they did. And therefore, it would be obvious that God would punish them by making the empire crumble, and that would be something very, very big, because it wasn't just a kingdom like another; that was the empire. So it was supposedly the major authority that God had allowed to be created on earth. And its fall and destruction was an extremely terrifying perspective, because it meant that mankind had behaved so badly that that was the only possible consequence. So every time there was, obviously, we have to think people genuinely believe these things, but at the same time, such ideas would be used from a propagandistic point of view instead to keep to keep things in order, to keep peace, public order, and functional administration, and so on. And into this process, the Ottonians played in parallel with the clergy, and there is all a political and institutional path that is definitely interesting to follow into this age. There would be a sort of reciprocal benefit, because the Ottonians were backed by the ecclesiastical powers. The ecclesiastical powers got more power and possibility of structuring its own domains, their own domains, even on an institutional level, at an institutional level. So we can identify essentially some major points that would be to ensure peace and order into the Kingdom of Germany, that at that time was being pushed by the Ottonians towards a dynastic direction, so that, contrarily-wise to the German tradition, the Dukes of Saxony basically wanted to monopolize the throne, the royal election. In many ways, they wouldn't succeed to do so, but they were essentially trying to break the bands that had been formed from among the duchies to maintain a sort of weak ruler that at this time instead was growing definitely in power from Saxony, and this would also imply to the efforts by the Ottonians to stem the process of feudal disgregation that was happening in Germany, and to to stem that through the use of the insertion, integration of the of the bishops of the church into the administration of the kingdom. This would extend even towards the papacy, that over time was increasingly influenced by the Ottonians. At a point there would be simply an appointment. One of the Ottonians became Pope, as a matter of fact. Even other figures were quite close to the Ottonians eventually managed to reach the papal St. Peter's soil, and there would be also the process of degradation of to arrest the process of degradation of the same ecclesiastical offices that up to that point had been quite freely disposed by the noble families of Germany, and that now instead were being tried to be taken away from that system by the Ottonians and to reframed into a bigger vision of imperial breadth, because that was really the point. Another major element of Ottonian policy would be the relation with the Eastern Roman Empire. So theoretically the Ottonians were claiming themselves as Roman emperors, one that they became, so at least by papal appointment. And as you know, there is all the controversy, that those guys essentially had invented in the West a sort of parallel Roman Empire that on the Christian basis is not that strange, in the sense that it is from a Roman point of view, because the Byzantines basically believed, because of Roman law, that just an emperor could appoint another emperor, becoming co-emperor. How could a bishop, even if it was the Bishop of Rome, do something like that? So that was the main criticism. And however, when the Ottonians were at the peak of their power, they, although not being as much powerful as the Carolingians, they were still a force to be reckoned with, and especially were expanding into Italy, into which the same Byzantines had domains in the south. And since the Carolingian times, the problem had always been the same, the center and the north of Italy being ruled by the Germanic power. Then in the middle you would have the Pope, that played like a bit sneakily in this direction, and in the south the Byzantines. At this point there would be also the Saracens and the Longobards, the Longobards that had survived from the Carolingian invasion of Italy, and so there was a lot of soft ground into which it was possible to play, politically speaking, because when you have a very fragmented situation, you can definitely play on the various agents to create chaos and to hamper the expansion of your rival, and that is happening that is trying to contrast you in turn. And one of the main problems at that point is that the Western emperors, let's call them that way, hadn't really had a formal, or at least a permanent, recognition of the imperial dignity by Constantinople, and the Holy Roman emperors actually were quite aware of the fact that once that they would get that as a formal recognition of their imperial dignity, they could essentially present themselves as rightfully as Roman emperors. So the Byzantines were quite smart at playing the card of not allowing too much to these guys, because they were increasingly becoming dangerous, but at time they could even turn out useful. So there would be actually warfare going on in Italy between the Ottonians and the Byzantines. But after various events, and into which it emerged clearly that the Ottonians couldn't drive away the Byzantines from southern Italy, um, the Ottonians obtained a quite remarkable diplomatic goal, that was the marriage between Otto's son with the Byzantine princess Theophanus. Um, uh, I remember what it's in English, how you call that. Um, Wait a second. Theophano. Yeah. You can find Theophania, Theophana, or Theophano, but if you read Theophano, it was she was the niece of the Byzantine Emperor John I Tzimiskes. So that was quite of a thing, because Otto's son was homonymous to his father. He would become Otto II, as a matter of fact. Also in here it's fascinating the parallel between the Ottonians and the Swabians, because also the son of Frederick Barbarossa married not a Byzantine princess, but however the heiress of another very big power, was Constance of Hauteville, that made the Swabians inherit the Sicilian crown. Here it happened similarly, also because Otto II lived a short while, just like Henry VI would, and their sons. Otto III also was the figure of a Roman emperor in many ways, as we'll see, like Frederick II would be. So it's quite interesting as a parallelism, between the Ottonians and the Swabians. There are so many things in common, coincidentally, and so even though this marriage didn't really make Constantinople recognizing the German emperor as such, as an emperor, as a Roman emperor, and nor that Italy would become German. It was just a diplomatical move that was okay for the Byzantines to do, but they wouldn't allow that much. So, as we said, Otto I died in 973, and for 10 years Otto II would rule. And Otto II found himself in a very difficult situation, because things in Germany after the death of his father had gone rough. There was a rebellion among the nobility, and at the same time he had a lot of troubles in keeping Italy in order, and especially Rome, that the Germans at that point had managed to secure in some way, at least theoretically, especially because Rome had a very strong aristocracy at that time, that was, by the way, quite they would look both. They were perfectly aware about their old imperial traditions. There would be technically still a so-called Senate in Rome, and Rome was definitely. I don't know if it was the largest city of the West still at that time. But even if it wasn't, it was a remarkable city for that time. But wait, it was a city that was fastly expanding, and the Roman aristocracy would be pretty strong, and it was extremely difficult for the Ottonians to maintain public order in Rome and a direct rule in there. But the major catastrophe really happened in 982. By Croton, that is a city in southern Italy, in Calabria, into which basically the German army of the Ottonians was defeated in an expedition against the Muslims of Sicily that were expanding into southern Italy at this point. And this would be a major defeat the Germans. Like the elite of German aristocracy would die in this battle. Also many bishops, by the way, because they were fighting alongside the rest of aristocracy. It was a very heavy blow. I mean, if the Germans had won in Croydon against the Saracens, history could have gone in a different fashion. But this defeat was a very heavy blow. By the way, the same Otto II was about to be caught by the Saracens. There is a story I like to tell because it's an anecdote. The German army destroyed by the Saracens, and the emperor lost, wandering like others. He arrived to the coast. I don't remember whether on the Ionian I think on the Ionian coast, and he would find a Byzantine ship on the shore. So the Byzantines were allies at that time with the Germans, and he however, very mild, let's say, allies, not very eager allies, and he was taken on board by the Byzantines, and the Byzantines kind of were like nice and gentle and all, but all they wanted to do was really to take Otto II as prisoner and to take him to Constantinople, because even if they were allies, once you take the emperor as an hostage, that's quite a situation from which you can dictate conditions. And what is funny about this is that Otto II understood the thing, and he basically jumped off overboard, and he escaped the Byzantines by swimming ashore, and then he eventually got back home. So that's interesting, by the way. Otto could swim. That's interesting news. But just to tell you how sneaky the relations between the Germans and the Byzantines would be at this point. And this major defeat, eventually Otto fell sick and he died of there were all these terrible, Europe was at that time still not a very healthy place to live, not very salubrious, let's say, and he got malaria seemingly, and he died the year after, 983. This was a hell of a problem, because his wife, the Princess Theophano, would be the regent of their son, who was just a child at that time, Otto III. They would stay in Rome. He was 3 years old, just for telling you, and at that time, having a 3 years old emperor, so he would be a mature, an adult, and fit to rule only after a very long time, usually when they were 16 or something like that. So, and plus the regent was a woman, who especially on she was the Byzantine princess. She was the niece of the Constantinopolitan emperor, but in the West there was usually a very different mind about this. They were, first of all, very distrustful of the Greeks at this point, but also and especially women didn't have, in that sense, a great importance, not even if they were a royalty. So the Salian dynasty implied that there would have to be a male heir to rule, and at least, and the current situation, the heir was there, but it was really too little, and his mother wasn't seen as a great, was probably despised by the Germans at that point. And therefore the situation would be extremely difficult, because even if Otto was appointed practically as emperor already at that age, nor Germany nor Italy recognized nor him nor his mother. So obviously all the German and Italian nobilities would start to act as if the the Ottonian power had vanished. And Otto III is an extremely fascinating figure, because he was the real and really the only emperor that was son to a Germanic sovereign and a Byzantine princess. So this would be pretty. This had effects on him, as such. He would be raised in Rome, so the center of the empire. You have to think Rome in the 10th century had still all these really much more than what we can see now in terms of monuments of imperial, and it would still be a very crucial city in European politics, and this double heritage of double legacy of Rome and Constantinople was really really flowing into Otto III's veins. And he by the way also rose under the influx of extremely charismatic and highly educated personalities. One of the most important was the hermit, the southern Italian hermit Nilus of Rossano, who embodied essentially, southern Italy would be still quite influenced by the Eastern spirituality at this time. It was in strong contact with Constantinople. And so this even this Eastern spirituality associated with the mysticism of the imperial symbols and universal conceptions really would have a great impact on the mind of the young Otto III. And when his mother Theophano died, he was eventually raised by his grandmother Adelaide. What the hell, these noises? I'm tired of hearing noises while I'm recording. All at this time, because this is time when people get home and have dinner and gather around, all this mess and with cars and all. Sick tired of this. Sorry. So he would really grow old in a very special environment, and at this point, great part of his imperial authority was recovered, because thanks to whom? To the great German archbishops. Remember when we said that the archbishops would see the imperial power as a very good horse to bet on, because that could essentially strengthen their institutional roles and powers. So the political matters in Germany were kind of re-established when Otto became an adult. And at this time, Otto could formally be crowned emperor, because he was felt as such, in the sense that he was son of two emperors. So it was felt that at least in the West he would have to be the guy, but he had not been crowned yet. So in 996, Otto went once again into Italy, because he also made back and forth in some way, he came essentially on the far of Carolingian and Constantinian tradition, so strongly permeated of Roman and Hellenic culture, and establishing definitely himself in Rome. So in this place that was a really holy place of imperial traditions. Actually, I said he was raised in Rome. I don't really remember whether this is correct or not. I wouldn't like to give you a false information, but indeed he had been he really he had visited Rome in other occasions. Yeah, he no, actually, I think he came in Rome at this point for the first time. But he had been still fascinated by the Roman ideal before going to Rome. This is important, that even if he was in Germany, he really truly believed, also because thinking of being raised with a Byzantine mother, that hasn't to be, it has to be beautiful in many ways, but you know, the Byzantine princesses at this point would be extremely proud of their Romanity, we can say. They were extremely you know, they would have to be they came from a court that strongly emphasizes their individual prestige. So even if you, especially if you're raised with a mother, you don't have your father because he's died, and like in this case, and you have to imagine the single parent having a very strong influence on you in some ways. So Theophanen was crucial for shaping Otto's mind, Otto's ideas, and it would all revolve around the Roman ideal in this sense. So he would see Rome as really as the center of the world, and it wasn't just about him. Like still at that time, Rome would be considered the center of the Christian world and of the imperial world. It was the place where in the West that was really perceived like the only possible point of reference. The papacy being extremely influential at this time in all Western Christendom, even before the reform that by the way, the same Ottonian intervention in papal affairs contributed to trigger, and plus Otto really felt this as the only place from which the renovatio imperii could really start ideally. So he not only was crowned as emperor, but he also settled permanently in Rome to rule from there all the other kingdoms, and this was actually the dream of the German emperors from you know, at that time, and as it would still been for a long time. Like Frederick, it's widely known that Frederick II wanted essentially to rule from Rome. Like Germany would have been just a peripheral province in that picture. He wanted to rule from Rome and from Rome only. It's very important to stress the ideological symbol of Rome, because that was like a very strong political legitimization in the eyes of everyone. I mean, it wasn't just the single or the individual beliefs. It was really showing that by ruling in Rome, God was on your side, because you could control the papacy, which was a very difficult task at this time, but essentially you would rule in the center into which the Saint Peter and Saint Paul had been martyrized, and that's really how you know, a German emperor could claim to be really a Western Roman emperor at that point, and even hope to become something more. Like, but that came as an option much later, when the Germans could even hope to take Constantinople. Okay, but another time we will talk more in depth about maybe the renovatio imperii as such. I mean, what it really meant to have re-established the empire by reuniting at least Germany, Burgundy, and Italy at this point, and what were all the political and ideological constructions that were being formulated at this time, because besides arms and weapons that really make history in many ways, there is still an ideal side of things that is really about even justifying things on the base of religion, of law, on something that especially in that time, from a universalistic perspective, was felt as the right thing, the just thing, the ideal and perfect aim that really was what laid behind the idea of empire. Okay, I've been talking too much even today, but I hope everything was clear. Sorry if I messed up something, if there was some mistake, but I kind of explained it and corrected it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel to receive further news about my contents. For now, I thank you heartily for listening, as always, and I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.